The Sonic Mega Collection was my first introduction to the indelible line of 16-bit entries in the Sonic series. Released for the GameCube and subsequently ported to the PS2, Windows, and Xbox a couple years later, the Sonic Mega Collection is a compilation of several Sega Genesis titles, which run via emulation as opposed to other Sonic compilation titles up to this point. This isn't a knock against the Mega Collection, however, as for the most part, these games run excellently barring some audio inconsistencies. Namely, some problems with the overall mix and master and some pretty nasty audio clipping. The Mega Collection contains some of the best of the Blue Blur 16-bit outings, albeit with the odd omission of Sonic CD, which would later be released on a separate compilation title a few years later. You can also unlock a handful of non-Sonic related Genesis titles like Rystar, which is one of the best platformers on the system. A few more titles were added in the aforementioned Sonic Mega Collection Plus. These games were plucked from the 8-bit Sega Master System and Sega Game Gear consoles. I've only ever owned the GameCube release of the Mega Collection, so for the purposes of this video, our discussion here will only cover that specific release. Sonic Mega Collection's user interface is some really appealing stuff. Every menu you navigate through has this colorful, arcadey look to it. This is definitely one of the most warm, inviting video games I've ever played, full stop. As someone who was born towards the tail end of the last millennium, I wasn't exposed to the pop culture phenomenon that was Sonic the Hedgehog until I played the Mega Collection. Outside of, like, seeing those Sonic ice cream bars on occasion, the way the Mega Collection presents its user interface in such a bubbly, inviting way always made it a pleasure just to boot the game up. And now, as I'm revisiting this joint, it's like enveloping myself in a warm blanket. Initially, upon booting up the Mega Collection, the games made immediately available to play include Sonic the Hedgehog 1 through 3, Sonic & Knuckles, Sonic 3D Blast, Sonic Spinball, and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Looking back in retrospect, it's kinda strange that you couldn't play Sonic 3 and Knuckles right out the box like you could in 1997's Sonic Jam for the Saturn. It was actually an unlockable game in the Mega Collection, but we'll get to that later. The library of games here is pretty all-encompassing for Sonic's 16-bit outings, again with the exception of Sonic CD and Knuckles Chaotix. But to be honest, I don't think too many people would be foaming at the mouth to play Knuckles Chaotix, even though I kind of like it. And I guess you could include other Sonic games here, but who would really want to play Sonic Eraser either? For the sake of brevity, let me just say that I'm a pretty big Sonic fan, and the Genesis games are some of the best 2D platformers ever made. The physics-based momentum platforming of Sonic the Hedgehog is unlike any of its contemporaries, and the stylish character designs and art direction of these games run circles around most games of the 16-bit era. However, what with this game being a compilation release of various Genesis titles, not all Sonic games are of equal quality here. So let's take a brief look at them then.
16-bit arcade graphics.
We can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
16-bit arcade action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
16-bit arcade hits.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does.
What Nintendo don't. The 16-bit Genesis system by Sega. Genesis does it all.
Sonic 1 nowadays is viewed as divisive amongst fans. Most players find that the game peaks with the opening level Green Hill Zone, and that the rest of the game is a downwards descent in quality. I personally have always dug Sonic 1, especially more so nowadays after having replayed it more often than the likes of some other Sonic titles for some reason. I think people go into these games with this erroneous mindset that you have to constantly be going fast, which isn't the case. At the end of the day, the Sonic games are still platformers, and occasionally occasionally you'll find yourself having to slow down, pick your spots, and play cautiously like a more conventional platformer. This gotta go fast mentality also played into the marketing too.
It's Super Nintendo is Super Mario World. Wow!
What's this one?
Oh, this is Sonic the Hedgehog from Sega Genesis. Look at these radical colors, huh?
Wow, Sonic's fast too.
No.
I will concede, however, that Sonic 1's level design can be incredibly frustrating. Labyrinth Zone is the worst offender here. It's as slow as molasses level, and you have to constantly worry about drowning throughout the duration of these 3 acts. Speaking of which, each level contains 3 acts as opposed to the usual 2-act structure found in later games. I think the 3-act structure of the levels in Sonic 1 is one of the biggest knocks against this game for me personally. Levels like Springyard Zone and Labyrinth Zone can drag on, but the fact that you essentially have to do each level 3 times certainly doesn't help matters. Not having the spin dash in any capacity is also frustrating. You really have to make use of the momentum in quarter pipes and hills to gain speed in this game. Sonic 1 is definitely the most challenging game of the Genesis lineup. One thing to note though is that this game benefits the most from modern ports such as Sonic 1 Forever or Sonic Origins. Playing through Sonic 1 with the spin dash and the elemental shields from Sonic 3 completely recontextualizes this game. However, that's not pertinent to the discussion of the Mega Collection as a whole. One last thing I'll say about Sonic the Hedgehog 1 is that I really dig the level progression. You start out in the woods with Green Hill Zone. Following that, Marble Zone is this ancient altered beast looking type civilization. And as you progress further in the game, the levels become more urbanized and industrialized, until you get to the final zone, Scrap Brain Zone, wherein you're smack dab in the midst of Robotnik's tyrannical operation. It's pretty neat stuff.
Now, when you buy the Sega Genesis that comes with Sonic 1, you'll get Sonic 2 absolutely free. Sonic 2 handles stubborn stains, embarrassing bald spots, no problem. It even slices and dices, makes thousands of julienne fries. But wait, you can play it too. This free Sonic 2 is a $54.99 value. You get 2 Sonics for the price of 1. Sonic 2 fits easily into any tackle box. Made from a space-age polymer plastic for years of family fun. And pets love it too. Buy the Sega Genesis that comes with Sonic 1 and get Sonic 2 free.
Act now. Wiener Dog Sweater sold separately.
Sonic 2 is a marginal improvement over the first game's formula, adding the spin dash mechanic, which has become all but irreplaceable when it comes to these games. Sonic 2's MO is, okay, but what if we did Sonic 1 but better, and it excels with blinding colors. Developed in California by the Sega Technical Institute, Sonic 2 has far better pacing than the first game. Blisteringly fast levels with a lot of spectacle that still require platforming and aren't just non-stop automated speed sections. There are far more memorable levels here than in Sonic 1, and an absolutely killer soundtrack. Sonic 2 ditched the 3-act structure from the first game and cut the levels down to 2 acts each, which definitely helps the pace of the game. I think the word I would use that best describes Sonic 2's design is flow. You have this constant inertia and sense of flow throughout the entirety of the game. Zones are typically only 2 to 3 minutes long, and whenever it feels like one has worn out its welcome, it's over and you're moving on to the next one. Sonic 2 also added the legendary Super Sonic as a reward for collecting the Chaos Emerald. Super Sonic is a lot of fun to play as, and the feeling of accomplishment whenever you get the Chaos Emeralds is palpable. Sonic 2 is probably my favorite of the Mega Drive Genesis Sonic games. It's right up there with Sonic CD. I think it's just the best, most concise package of all the Sonic the Hedgehog games.
It's Groundhog Day!
Sonic 3 is coming.
Look for the shadow!
On Groundhog Day. Make that Hedgehog Day.
Did you see the shadow? Look out!
Sonic 3, February 2nd.
Sonic 3 and Knuckles is a beast. This is a huge game that was actually split into two separate games because of a burgeoning deal with Mickey D's.
Sonic? Are you guys in there?
Hey, here's a hint. They're at McDonald's in the $1.99 Sonic 3 Hamburger Happy Meal.
Sonic 3 was released in early 1994, and Sonic & Knuckles, which is essentially the second half of Sonic 3, was released later that same year. You could combine the two games together by making a Cronenberg monstrosity with the Sonic & Knuckles cart, which would give you the complete experience. Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Earlier in this retrospective, I mentioned that Sonic 3 and Knuckles is an unlockable game in the Mega Collection, which is a bizarre decision in and of itself. But the way you unlock it is even more bizarre. To unlock Sonic 3 and Knuckles as a complete package in the Mega Collection, you just have to open and close Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles like 20 times each, respectively. It's such an arbitrary and bizarre design choice, but at least it's here in the Mega Collection, unlike Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection for the 360, which is an incredible package of Sega Genesis titles, but for some reason in that game you couldn't combine the two games, not to my knowledge at least. I think Sonic 3 and Knuckles has far higher highs than the first two games, but also lower lows. Sonic 2, in my opinion, is a consistently fun and kinetic game that pulls no punches from start to finish. Well, with the exception of Metropolis Zone. Sonic 3 is a slower, more explorative game that's predicated on you finding secrets in levels, obtaining the Chaos Emeralds, and subsequently the Super Emeralds later on. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is an absolute banger of a game with an incredibly ambitious scope and, surprisingly enough, a great story that is conveyed to the player entirely through gameplay alone. For a platformer from 1994, it's got this cinema-style production value that's entirely unparalleled compared to anything else coming out at the time that wasn't a JRPG. Where Sonic 3 falters is the pacing of the game. Levels in Sonic 3 can take up to 10 minutes to complete, and each individual act is far longer than anything in Sonic 2 or even Sonic 1. Some zones, like Sandopolis Zone, are pretty infamous and are some of the worst I've ever played in a Sonic game. Like I said, this game has incredibly high highs and low lows, but the sheer quality and scope of this game is mind-blowing. And if you're going back to any of the Genesis titles on original hardware, I think this one has aged the most gracefully, what with it having a save feature. Also, Sonic 3 and Knuckles has Blue Sphere. How are you not finna love Blue Sphere? Come on now. The addition of the elemental shields are the biggest boon to the Sonic formula, and said shields were first shown off here in Sonic 3. The three flavors of elemental shield give Sonic an additional jump, a forward dash, or a basketball bounce depending on which one you have. They also provide elemental resistance to their respective element, in addition to the new maneuverability options. I seriously love the elemental shields in Sonic 3. They're completely irreplaceable in classic Sonic, and it's hard going back to vanilla Sonic 1 or 2 without them. Yeah, Sonic 3 is damn close to a masterpiece. If you thought I was finna dunk on it in this video, you got it all twisted. While I don't think this game is completely flawless like some folk claim it is, it's still an absolutely spectacular platformer and a great capstone to the Sega Genesis trilogy. The first three Sonic games here in the Mega Collection are the main attraction. However, I don't think the other titles are anything to sneeze at. Rystar is an incredible platformer and is up there with Rocket Knight Adventures for me, for my favorite Sega Genesis joint, and Flicky is a fun enough, albeit simple, high-score-based arcade game from the 80s. But let's take a look at the other Sonic games featured here in the Sonic Mega Collection. Sonic Spinball is not a game that I'm too fond of. I'm not exactly a big fan of pinball to begin with, let alone video pinball, but Sonic Spinball was never a game that I could get into. I actually had this game on the Game Gear and messed around with it when I was younger, but I could never make it past the first level. And now as an adult, I still can't get past the first level. I do love the sort of demented mechanical H.R. Giger look this game has going for it though, with its visuals and enemy design. And the soundtrack by Howard Drawson is incredible. It just smacks front to back. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is a North American localization of the Japanese puzzle series Puyo Puyo by Compile. I guess Sega of America thought that Majo Magical Girls wouldn't be perceived too well in the West, and they were probably right, so they slapped some Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog characters over Puyo Puyo and called it a day. I love the 90s Sonic cartoons. Sonic Sat AM is an incredibly well-written and dark animated adaptation that's still pretty good to this day. The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, which Mean Bean Machine is based off, is this surreal and absolutely moronic slapstick adventure which I absolutely adore. And Sonic Underground is...
It's Butnick's new Sonic Tonic. It made him fast, but then it did this to it.
Listen, I suck at Puyo Puyo. My jurisdiction falls under the Panel de Pon series and Dr. Mario. That's more my bag personally. But I will concede that Puyo Puyo is an excellent puzzle game which requires a lot of premeditation and foresight. Mean Bean Machine is a cool puzzle game and a pretty good localization of Puyo Puyo, and it has Scratch and Grounder in it, but it's not for me.
Pingers!
Sonic 3D Blast is a fascinating game. Released for the Sega Genesis and the Sega Saturn on the same day in 1996, this game was developed by Traveler's Tales while Sega was busy with Sonic Extreme, and we all know how that turned out. 3D Blast is a top-down isometric platformer that takes a completely different approach to the Sonic formula. Actually, barring the cast of Sonic characters, 3D Blast barely resembles a Sonic game in any other form or fashion. You gotta collect these flicky birds and take them to this floating ring at the end of the level. If you get hit, the flickies scatter and you've gotta grab them. It's an incredibly simple, straightforward gameplay loop. In spite of everything going against 3D Blast, I actually quite enjoy this game. It's a very slow, methodical game, but there's this quaint pedestrian charm to it that makes me smile. The big deal breaker here is the controls. They suck. Controlling Sonic feels very sluggish and unresponsive. I think if this game had tighter controls and the implementation of some kind of homing attack, it would have gotten far better reception, or at least would have been more fun to play. My favorite thing about 3D Blast are the graphics. The pre-rendered visuals give me the same vibes as Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario RPG, and that's always certainly a good thing. I love me some Rareware. I don't know, they say there's no accounting for taste, but 3D Blast is a game that I quite enjoy, even though I barely replay it. The version featured here in the Mega Collection is the Genesis version, as opposed to the Sega Saturn version. There aren't a ton of differences between the Genesis and Saturn versions, outside of some visual flourishes, a different soundtrack, and the different special stages. The best way to play this game nowadays is to play the Director's Cut ROM hack by John Burton, who was in fact the original director of this game at Traveler's Tales. There's a lot of quality of life improvements that make it a far more enjoyable experience to the Genesis and Saturn original.
GameCube.
ソニックと一緒ならソニックと一緒ならできる
盛り盛り盛りだくさんソニックメガコレクション今ならソニックスーパーシール入り
Where Sonic Mega Collection goes from being an ordinary compilation of games to a memorable museum of Sonic regalia is with all of the extras. North American instruction manual scans are included in their entirety for each game, and even though I never really found them too helpful, it was still cool to flip through the pages of these booklets and read up a little bit on the minutiae of these games, like Dr. Robotnik's infamous diabolical speed traps in Sonic 3. The real meat and potatoes here falls under the extras section, full cover scans from the Archie comics, bonus videos, and character renders. In an age before the internet had yet become super ubiquitous in every household, having such high-quality scans of official Sonic artwork was awesome. I got just as much entertainment from perusing the extras section in the Mega Collection as I did from playing the actual games. It was like I was looking into a window from the past, even though at the time I didn't even really know it was from the past. I would spend dozens of hours just combing through these pages in a state of wonder. The background music here is this ephemeral sounding string ensemble that sounds like nostalgia. extras section is still entertaining to browse through, and as a kid in the mid-2000s, it was fascinating glossing through all of these magazine scans and high-quality character renders. Sonic and the gang feel so static nowadays with their poses and renderings, but the stylish artwork of Yuji Uekawa's illustrations during the Dreamcast era are so stylish and iconic. The extra videos that were included were dope too. You got some trailers for the upcoming Sonic Advance 2 and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. You even got a brief retrospective of the series highlights and releases up until that point. But the one video that I kept coming back to, the one that captivated me in a way that I had never felt before, was the Sonic CD opening animation. This blew my mind as a kid. Seeing the stylish, snappy animation by Studio Junio blew my socks off when I was younger. It was actually the catalyst for me wanting to get the Gems collection when that came out a couple years later, even though I mostly spent my time playing Sonic R on the Gems collection, but that's another discussion for another video. So yeah, I just wanted to take you guys down a personal trip through memory lane with me today. The Mega Collection was my first exposure to the Sonic series and was one of my most played games when I was a kid. I hold it in the same high regard as I do the Mega Man Anniversary Collection for a lot of the same reasons. While the Mega Collection is not necessarily the best way to play these games nowadays, both officially or unofficially, it's still an excellent value if you can cop it relatively cheaply on secondhand markets. I have a lot of warm memories playing the Mega Collection and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle back in the mid-2000s, and booting it up to record footage for this video caused a wave of sepia-tone memories to flood over me. It takes me back to being a kid during the summertime and playing some video games. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day.